Hello and welcome to ChooseFI. Today on the show, we have Bill Yount and Becky Heptig, who are the hosts of the new podcast, Catching Up to Fi. And this show has really struck a chord with the Fi community. And I think, honestly, it's one of the most exciting additions to the Fi community in a very, very long time. And the need is obvious. There are so many people who are getting a late start as they think about it, whatever they define that as. And they're wondering, can I do this? Can I pursue financial independence at X age, whatever that is, 35, 40, 50, 70, whatever the number is? They believe it's maybe too late and that they're playing catch up. And I think this new podcast has really filled that void to talk precisely to those people. And I'm excited to chat with them just about their lives and story, but also about quite literally catching up to Fi and what is someone who thinks of themselves as a late starter. Where are they? What can they do? And how can we help them? So with that, welcome to ChooseFI. All right, Becky and Bill, thank you for being here. And Becky, welcome back. So you told your story on episode 152, which actually came out almost 4 years ago, which is astounding.
It's amazing that it was that long ago.
Yeah, it is wild. And that was basically at the start of your retirement. So, right, you and your husband, Stephen, had reached Fi just a short bit before that. And that was, okay, hey, we've hit Fi, but we got started at 50. We were really net worth zero or close to zero at the age of 50. And that's a remarkable turnaround.
It was. When we started on that journey, we didn't know where it was going to go, where it would end, but you kind of feel like there may not even be an end, like we might not ever get there. So it really does feel like it could be too late.
Yeah, I hear you. And it definitely can feel like that. And that's a beautiful thing about your story. And obviously, I would suggest, and we'll link this up in the show notes, everybody check out episode 152. So you can find that show notes or choosefi.com/152, or just obviously find it in your podcast player. So, Bill, welcome to ChooseFI. I know we've been corresponding for many years now, and it's just absolutely wonderful to have you here. So you are an emergency room physician.
That's correct.
And you're still in practice. And you got obviously a very late start. You, as you've said on your podcast and others, you kind of fell prey to many of the lifestyle traps that maybe physicians fall into, some potentially dead and not living like a resident once you have that income. I'd love to hear just a little bit about your story.
Well, thanks again for having us today. And it's really fun to be here with you and get this message out there. It's an important one. We feel that we're the silent majority. And the fact that we've seen a boon in community membership and listeners really speaks to the fact that we're hitting a chord. As far as my story goes, yes, I was pretty much the typical physician. Came out of residency, didn't know how to partition my paycheck. I spent first, saved last, succumbed to all the lifestyle inflation issues, new houses, new cars, and just making all the mistakes, whole life insurance, financial salesmen as investment advisors. And we just didn't pay attention. We weren't intentional. We had no idea what we were doing. We didn't pay attention to net worth, spending tracking. We just lived life. And I think this is a common message for people out there that are late starters. It's a very common story. And woke up 20 years later, about age 50, like Becky did. It just was an age-related thing, and the fact that our kids exited the nest and we thought the world would take care of us, that, finances would take care of us, and we realized that our net worth was nowhere near it needed to be. And we launched into the rabbit hole, and we're about 6-7 years into the journey, about 6-7 years more to go. We're in the painful part, where we're in what we call the muck in the middle, where we just got to, do the work, spend the time, save the money. It's quite frankly boring and stressful. The initial phase was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I hear you. It can be that mucky middle. I'm curious. So boring and stressful. That interests me. So boring, I see 100%, because I think for most people who get into the world of financial independence, it is that lightning bolt kind of change in mindset. And I want to talk to both of you about change in mindset, but it's that lightning bolt. It feels exciting, right? Hey, I'm making all these changes. I'm seeing my net worth grow from zero or whatever it may be, and starting to see changes. So I get that it certainly feels boring for most of us because this is not a get rich quick scheme, right? Let's all be clear here. It's maybe get wealthy over the medium term, right? 10, 15, 20 years. And once you get past those first couple of years of excitement and you have everything on autopilot, it just kind of moves along and it does feel boring. But talk to me about stressful because you're the first person I've ever heard use that term.
Well, when you're in your 50s, you see a lot of people that got it right retire. You see this happen, you wish it could happen to you. And then in my profession, especially, I struggle with burnout. And there's the crossover point between burnout in your primary profession and the shortfall in reaching FI. You've just missed that and you've got to work. You've got to do the work in spite of the fact that, you're a little bit jealous of your friends in the FI community. And it's especially hard. You may not be aware of it if you're outside the FI community, but in the FI community, everybody gets it right all the time in their 30s, their 40s, and retires in their 50s. And you didn't. And you feel like an outsider.
Yeah, I think that's part of the story that a lot of us build about the other, right? About some other, like you said, everybody in the fight community gets it right. But I don't think that's true. I think that's probably what it appears like, right? Like, so, okay, yeah, somebody found FI early, like me, let's say, or I was a natural saver, but I've made dozens of catastrophic, stupid mistakes and maybe on the outside it looked like I got everything right. But you it's such an important point there, Bill, that it's not about reality of the situation. It's about what is the appearance? What do I think? And I think for a lot of people finding FI, Becky, right? Like when they find it late, they feel like everybody else got it right. And they feel like they're hopelessly behind. And I think that might be one of the biggest mountains to overcome in getting started. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think so. I agree. In fact, when you kind of wake up and go, oh my gosh, what have I been doing? And what am I going to do with this now? You feel a lot. There's a whole big ball of emotions that comes with that. And Bill and I have talked about that before. You feel regret, shame, remorse, all those things, all those negative feelings. And it causes you to feel alone because you don't want to admit what you've done. You've put a good face on. Probably most of us have put a good face on to our friends and family. And I mean, to be honest, we look like every other American, right? We're living paycheck to paycheck. We're spending everything we make and sometimes plus some. But everybody else looks like that too. So, you don't want to admit to your friends and family for sure that I've screwed this up. And sometimes it's hard to admit it to yourself. So there's some hurdles. There's some emotional hurdles that sometimes folks have to get over before they get to the excitement of the rabbit hole of information and learning. So it's, there's a process there at the beginning.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's a dual pronged issue in that you are worried about other people, right? So put a good face on.
Mm.
But I think the second part that you said is really where it hits is when you look in that mirror and you have to own up to yourself that, hey, maybe I didn't do this right. Maybe I could have done it better. But I think the most important thing is to get over that, right? Is to say, like, okay, look, I can't beat myself up about the past because that doesn't do any good. It literally only does harm at that point psychologically, right? You cannot fix the past. You can only make changes in the present and future to make your life better.
Oh, absolutely. And it's hard. You can't let yourself live there. You can't let yourself live in that muck of emotion and looking at the past. And you're right, looking in the mirror sometimes is the hard choice. Like in our case, we knew there would never be a pension or a retirement. Stephen's office didn't even have 401k. We knew it was always going to be on our shoulders. But guess what? We still didn't do anything about it. So
Yeah.
you're like, and when you wake up, you want to go, what was I thinking?
Well, I mean, we literally lived the YOLO life. I had a boat named YOLO. I mean,
Of course you did. That's awesome.
Becky did the boat thing too. So we share the boat thing in common. And, the opportunity cost of things like that. Yes, there's a lot of good memories. And people that are late to FI or catching up to FI, the one thing they've probably gotten right is they've lived life. They've established memories. And we did with our kids, just like Die with Zero. We had tons of memory dividends. We spent money on memory dividends. We didn't pay attention to our future self. We never got to know them till later, didn't know they existed. We didn't reverse engineer our life. We just, prospectively engineered our life. There was no thoughts of the future. It was really thoughts of the present. And now I'm dealing with the Facebook approach to FI, the Instagram approach to FI, where you see these success stories, and everybody in some level is a late starter, or they can feel that way. Our audience is comprised of some 20-year-olds, some 30-year-olds, predominantly 40 and 50-year-olds, but it's a common path emotionally, financially. There's several stages to it. And, it's the shame, remorse stage. It's the excitement stage. It's the mucky middle stage. It's the excitement stage when you see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then there's a realization phase that, yes, you've done it and you're living it, like Becky is 4 years in.
Mm-hmm. Bill, I'm so glad that you always sort of bring me back to, I think a lot about those negative emotions at the beginning, but you do a good job of bringing me back to, but look at what you did get to do. We still did create memories. I mean, that's why we spent money, is we enjoyed life. We just should have enjoyed it in a little bit different way. We could have had an enjoyable life and saved money at the same time. We just didn't think we could.
Right. Yeah, that is the beautiful balance point that I think we're all striving for. And I don't know that many of us get it exactly right. I think we all tilt in one direction. Maybe I look back and say, oh, I probably could have done this a little better, in the sense that I don't think I ever thought of myself as a miser or frugal or cheap or whatever the words we would use to describe it negatively, right? But did I have as many amazing experiences as I could have if I had made just a couple of little changes, right? It doesn't mean I needed to save zero, just meant, okay, maybe instead of optimizing for a 50% savings rate, you know what, maybe 30 or 35 would have made for a better life balance. And it's easy to say on this side of it. And obviously, I'm not regretful that I've reached financial independence. Obviously, now I have, hopefully, another 50 years to kind of make up for that and or just do what I want. But nevertheless, nobody wants to wish away time. And I think it's important that both of you are saying, hey, look, these weren't wasted years. It's not like I was literally burning money in a fireplace and sitting there and doing nothing. I was, in each of your cases, you were living your lives and you were creating memories and you were doing, hopefully, wonderful things. But clearly that's not the balance point either, to have $0 of savings or close to it and have to totally make up for it at the age of 50 or X, whatever that age is.
Well, it seemed like we were burning money in the fireplace.
You might have with the boat, Bill.
We built 2 houses. We overspent on houses. Our biggest mistake by far was at the Great Recession. We were, spend first, save last, low savings rate, probably single digits, actually. We renovated a house to the nines. The Great Recession occurred. We were upside down. We were house poor, so saving very little. And then we got scared. And we did the cardinal sin. We sold at the bottom of the market. We just de-risked because we were fearful. We didn't stay the course. We didn't know to stay the course. And then during the bull market, we had a lower savings rate for 2/3 of it, and we missed it. There was a lot of FI that occurred during the bull market. And we missed, not completely, but largely missed the boat on that, which made our journey a little bit harder. I think Becky had a little bit different experience with the wind at her back in this era, right?
I did. Of course, at the beginning of that era, I still didn't know what I was doing, but we had at least started saving money. And, some of this boils down to really simple ideas and simple tasks. And people will ask me a lot, what advice do you have? My advice is save money. I mean, that's what we didn't do. We set ourselves up for the pain we experienced because we didn't even have an emergency fund. We didn't have savings of any kind when life whacked us in the face. And it got real painful real fast. So we could have definitely made better choices back then. We had fun with life, but we were ignoring the things that we should have also been doing at the same time.
Yeah, I understand the point, certainly. But again, you can't beat yourself up about the past, right?
That's right.
And what we have to do is take action. And I think that's what I'm most curious about in each of your cases, and I know it's kind of weird having two guests with two totally different stories. So let's go one by one, and maybe we can each just unpack one of your stories at a time. So I think the biggest question that I get from people who have found FI quote unquote late, again, whatever that means to them, is let's say hypothetically they're like a Becky in that their adult lives are moving along. They have a mortgage, they have cars, they might have kids, they're saving very little or zero. They're the typical living paycheck to paycheck American. And maybe they've found FI and they need to know, how do I dig out from this? What can I do? What are the actual tangible steps I can do? Because it feels insurmountable. It feels like all of these structural costs are just built in. How do I do this? How do I unwind this? And I think that to me is the single biggest question that people have that I've noticed. And I'd love to hear, maybe later we'll talk about other major questions that you found. But to me, this is the point. So Bill, why don't we start with you? We'll unpack your story in that regard, just the taking action, the unwinding, and then Becky, we'll switch back to you.
Well, the path to unwinding is really no different from the FIRE community in the age group of 20s and 30s. You've got to rapidly increase your savings rate. We went from single digits to 35 to 40%. At that point, it got a little painful for lifestyle, but we found that saving more money didn't affect our lifestyle like we thought it would have. We were wondering, where does all this money go? And definitely it was materialistic at times. It wasn't just memory dividends. There was a lot of waste involved. But, increase your savings rate, get involved quickly in low-cost index funds. We had to unwind some actively managed funds and working with a private bank that was charging us high fees. You got to reduce your expenses with regards to your investments. You've got to maximize your savings rate. You got to maximize the use of low-cost passive index funds. People wonder in our community, how can we escalate it? How can we make the path faster at a time where, your risk tolerance may be less, and we don't know what to tell them exactly because I'm a little bit more risk averse now. I can't afford to make mistakes. People do use real estate. They do use small business, but I come from a bit of a scarcity and fear-based mentality based on my upbringing and just the way things were. So it's hard for me to take the risk that some people are able to and escalate their path to FI, which is certainly possible. And we're going to talk about in our show ways that they can do that, but they have to be willing to start the small business, to, escalate their work effort at a time where you may be fatigued.
Yeah.
I want to work less. And actually, I did downshift and prolonged my path to FI because I had to manage burnout at the same time. So it's a little counterintuitive at a time where you want to ramp up your income, which will make the hugest difference as opposed to frugaling down. But I ramped it down. And I'm fortunate that my wife is a full-time earner. So we have a pretty big shovel to make up for pretty big mistakes.
Right. And that burnout, that was a really great answer to my stressful question earlier, where you said you're basically seeing others, there's some jealousy, there's some burnout. So I had never conceptualized why that kind of messy or murky middle would be stressful, but that made perfect sense. So, all right, Bill, I'm going to grill you a little bit because you gave me some general stuff, which is wonderful and I think is going to be really helpful for people. But you basically just said increase your savings rate. Okay, well, that's well and good. But actually, how does someone do this? So someone, and obviously, like you said, you have a big shovel. So let's be clear. You're a physician, your wife is employed. So you have a nice income coming in. That may or may not be applicable to everybody, but it's going to be applicable to a lot of people, which I think is another one of the benefits of people who are catching up to FI, people who feel like late starters, is there's a reasonable likelihood they're in their highest earning years. So that actually is one of the biggest positives going for people who are catching up to FI. So let's use you as an example here. Like you said, you were saving 10% or less of your income at that point, or thereabouts. Let's just say that roughly, and increase your savings rate to 30 or 35. But how does that happen? I know you said there was some waste, but there had to be some big moves because you have a big income. So the delta for 20 to 25% increase in savings rate is a lot of money. Just give us a couple examples, and I don't need to dive into every nut and bolt of your money situation. Obviously, that's not the game we're playing here, but give us some examples of what changes you made to do that.
We downsized our life. We downsized our house. Very painful things to do. We went from 4,500 square feet of life to 2,500 square feet of life and dumped the stuff, dumped the weight on our shoulders. And my wife went from more part-time to full-time. She's a physician as well. So she did ramp up her income. So overall, we saw a net zero on income. And we just focused on savings. We set goals. We put out an investor policy statement and said, we're going to stick to this. That's critical. You got to set your life goals. Where do you want to be in 10, 12, 13 years? And anybody, regardless of their numbers, can reach FI. And we've reiterated this on our show many times. I may have bigger numbers, but we have a bigger spending rate too. And people of average Joes, average incomes can absolutely do this. They shouldn't be intimidated by the fact that I'm a physician at all. So those were some of the things we did. I think downsizing is the big thing. And then working on the income side so you can increase that gap. And we found money and we increased the gap at some level. And, we're comfortable at 40% savings rate. And that, according to Mr. Money Mustache and his famous article, Shockingly Simple Math to Early Retirement, well, it's also to retirement on time. Those numbers work for everybody. And at our savings rate, it's a 12, 13-year journey. And I think that's what Becky found too.
Yeah, and I think you're about halfway through based on what you said. So you're about 5 to 6 years in, you're 5 to 6 years away. So you are quite literally in that murky middle, as you said. But yeah, thank you for giving some of those concrete examples. And I think setting that goal might be actually the most important aspect. Obviously, downsizing your life was a big thing, but understanding, reorienting from spending, from YOLO, from the boat name to, hey, we have a goal for savings. Well, when you reorient in that regard, everything else gets easier because that is the goal. And you and your wife were working together as a team to make that happen. So I think that is way more critical than I think other people might think upon first glance. So really wanted to dial into that. But just last thing before we get to Becky is unwinding and getting into low cost funds. So we actually had Sean Mullaney, the FI tax guy, on episode 447. That was a mailbag episode. And we talked a little bit about firing your financial advisor and unwinding. But I'm curious, at that point, Bill, was that difficult for you to do? Were there any, maybe one or two little takeaways that you might pass along to the audience for? I think a lot of people get stuck. And that's really one of the most difficult aspects of FI is, okay, I theoretically know what I have to do, but it's hard to envision taking the action on it because maybe there's these couple little mental impediments. Did you have any issue unwinding? I don't know if you had a financial advisor, but unwinding and getting into low cost funds, or was it fairly simple that you moved subsequent money in, or just talk me through just a couple quick takeaways?
Well, like I mentioned, we were in the private bank at a large institution with a financial salesman, not advisor, no way fiduciary. And we were spending, as I later figured out, about 1% on getting absolutely no advice. They didn't prevent us from selling out, for example, in the Great Recession. It was a horrible thing. They just let us do, without any knowledge, what we thought we should do. And so pulling out from that was relatively easy. It was like, this is no help. This is a cost, and these costs compound against us in a big way. I don't want to put their kids through college, which is functionally how it works out, I think. So yes, it was easy to pull away from there. And I was in a little bit of analysis paralysis, as a lot of people end up in. I read dozens and dozens of books before I took action. And it doesn't take that. It takes a few basic books, a few podcasts. And we found that in our audience. They're using our podcast to take actionable steps because they don't feel alone. They do get, like you emphasize over and over and over again on your podcast, they do get actionable moments. And it was really easy. Pulled the money out of everything, transitioned it into Vanguard, and that's where we've been ever since. And it feels very good, to be an owner of your own funds, to manage your life, to have that control at a time where you felt out of control. It's all net positive.
Yeah. Yeah. And overcoming that inertia is really the hardest part. But yeah, as Sean said in that episode, and you kind of alluded to there, okay, it's actually not that hard in practical terms to move to a different institution. In most cases, you just call up the new institution because they're the one who has the incentive essentially to get your funds. And they can do, in most cases, what Sean introduced as an ACAT, which is an automated customer account transfer. They really just take the lead, and mostly it's going to be pretty seamless on the back end. So for a lot of people, this is actually a lot easier than you would otherwise think. So Bill, thanks for diving into that. I appreciate it. And Becky, so same question to you is ultimately you're at 50.
Mm-hmm.
You have essentially zero net worth, zero savings rate per se. Let's say, we'll round to zero on both. and
Right.
and you made significant changes. But again, that unwinding of a lifestyle is really, really difficult for people to envision. Can you pass along a couple of really concrete steps that you and Steven took to make that happen?
Absolutely. The first thing that we did, and we didn't know this was the first step we needed, but we changed our mindset. And the way we got there was we had found ourselves in debt. We really had never had a lot of debt in the past. We just spent what we made. But when life smacked us in the face, we ended up with debt. And I became very fearful. Like, I don't see how we're ever going to get out of this. Like, I'm going to die with this debt. So our first step was finding Dave Ramsey. So we went through Dave Ramsey, did the baby steps just the way he lays it out, definitely got out of debt. But the biggest thing it did for us was change our mindset about money. I realized I can be happy without spending every penny that's coming in the door. And, we were doing things like, we talk about the three big rocks: housing, transportation, and food. So we did not change where we lived at that point, but we did make some changes with other things. I had always had the idea of I don't want to buy a used car. I don't want to buy somebody else's problems. So, every few years we had two cars between us. Every few years, one of us was buying a new car. So we had the just, persistent car loan kind of thing. And there were some things that weren't an issue for me. I didn't go have my nails done every 2 weeks, or I didn't, redecorate my house every few years. So we were spending money on experiences, but we also had a boat. It was a sailboat. But rather than buy a used one, we went to the boat show and ordered a brand new boat that showed up, 3 months later from the manufacturer. Well, no, we didn't need to do it that way. That was a silly thing to do. So circling back to your question, we changed our mindset. And then the next thing that I suggest to people is figure out where you are. Because sometimes you don't know what direction you need to go in if you don't know where you're standing. So we figure out, like, pull all the bills out, pull all of the statements out, the retirement statements, figure out where you are. Sometimes it actually doesn't look as bad as you think it does. Now, the other side of that coin is it might be worse than you think it is, but you need to know where you stand. What is your debts? Do you have anything in savings? Is it invested in something that's going to make you any money? So we got rid of the debt. And like Bill, when we turned things around, we tried to do some investing on our own. We knew enough to buy mutual funds and not stocks, but we were trying to pick mutual funds on our own. And that was terrible. That was a fail. So, we threw up our hands and said, okay, uncle, and gave all of our money to Edward Jones. And I will tell people at the time that was the right thing for us, but it didn't stay the right thing for us for very long. So we found ChooseFI in 2017, right after you guys
right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning, right after you guys had started. In fact, our son Stephen is the one. People have heard me say this before. Stephen came to us and said, "Hey, there's this podcast. I think you'd like it," because he knew we were trying to learn. And I was like, "What's a podcast? and how do you download it?" But your early episode with JL Collins was one of the first episodes we listened to. We heard that, got his book, Simple Path, read the book, and probably within 2 weeks, we fired Edward Jones because we finally understood what that was costing us. And we were probably pushing at 2%, all in, it was probably about 2%. So the process, and I've had people be nervous about even getting onto Fidelity or Vanguard to just open an account. So I want to encourage folks, it's not hard. And if you can't figure it out on their website, you can call them and they will step you through it on the phone. So if you need to move some money from one financial institution to another, you definitely can do it. We moved all our money from Edward Jones to Vanguard. Some of the money transferred directly. Some of it didn't because it was in proprietary funds. So those funds we had to sell, turn it into cash, and move the cash, which caused a tax event for us. So we went through and evaluated, is that worth it? And in our case, it was. So we took the tax hit. As I say, we ripped the Band-Aid off. We took the tax hit all at once and then didn't look back and started from there. So my advice to folks is figure out where you are, be willing to do some learning, which is what we did. You're not too old to learn something new. So, pick up a book, open up a podcast. There's lots and lots of help out there. Figure out what your plan needs to be and come up with a plan. And once you have a plan, you've got a direction to go in, you've got a target to look forward to, and then every dollar you save is just going to move you towards that target.
Yeah, and that's similar to what Bill was talking about with setting that goal. And it's really important. And Becky, I want to ask you two very quick questions in response, but after that, I'm going to ask Bill, is it ever too late to start? And I think that's a critical question. So, but real quick. So, Becky, you said Edward Jones was right for you at that time, at the beginning. And I'm curious, why? Did they give you advice? Was it behavioral? Did it help set it? Or why would it have been right?
Unfortunately, it was not advice or behavioral. But what happened was they at least put our money into mutual funds that were going to move the needle forward. Like I said, we were looking at, the old saying of past performance is no indicator of future. So we didn't know what to do other than to get on Morningstar and look at who seemed to be doing good. And that really didn't get us anywhere. So Edward Jones at least put us into some funds that were going to move the needle. But unfortunately, there was no advice. In fact, now when I look back on it, our advisor, gave us a plan of here's when you can retire. Well, interestingly enough, those dates happened to correspond with our Social Security full retirement age. So, wow, isn't that a coincidence?
Right. So you can actually retire based on your savings and net worth. But yeah. So, okay. That's very, very interesting. And then just last note is you mentioned the big rocks, the three big rocks, and we've talked about them as the big three expenses for 6.5 years now on ChooseFI, and they're critical. I'm curious, when you made that change to start prioritizing saving money, did you focus on any little things, or was it just simply, hey, if we get these big things right and we cut out the debt and we maybe get rid of the boat and or the massive things, did you also prioritize down to, hey, we're not using Netflix, we're going to cut it, it's $15 a month, or our cell phone, or was that almost beside the point?
We did focus on it. We focused on everything. And the reason was we knew, like Bill and I tell people all the time, you're really doing the same thing as a late starter that a 25-year-old is going to do. You just have to do it faster and be more intentional. So we did start cutting everything. And one of the motivations for that was our children were like junior high going into high school. We knew college was ahead of us and we knew weddings were ahead of us. So we really did a much better job of looking down the road at what was coming. And Stephen was paid at that time mostly in bonuses. He had a small, bi-monthly income, but the majority of his pay came in bonuses. And so we would plan out, and he got 4 of those a year. We would plan out before every bonus, what are we going to do with this? So we didn't let that money just sift through our fingers. We knew exactly what we were going to set aside and how we were, as Bill calls it, we knew how we were going to partition that paycheck.
Nice. I like that. All right, Bill, is it ever too late to start on the path to FI?
We get this question quite often. And Becky and I differ slightly on the answer to this question. I do think it can be too late to start to get to 25 times your expenses and a comfortable retirement. And at 50, I think that's potentially the breaking point for a lot of people. Traditional retirement age, 65. Most people don't make it until 62, 63. So 12 years is the path. Our whole goal with our podcast is to get people to start earlier and to realize if they start earlier than 50, they're ahead of the game. So yes, I think it can be too late. It's never too late, as Becky says, to get your finances in order. Every dollar makes a difference, gives you control, gives you a sense of well-being. But yeah, for me at least, I felt like I could have been too late.
Okay. Yeah, I like how rational you are about this, because I think it speaks to reality in a lot of senses, right? And I think a lot of times we don't like to admit this, right? Because the question often is FI for everyone? And I think I have tried to be as intellectually honest about this as humanly possible over the years of saying, yes, I think FI and the concepts of FI are for everyone. But let's not fool anyone that if you have a higher income, if you found this earlier, especially the higher income, it's going to be easier for you. It just is. Anybody who's not saying that is lying to you. But what I like to focus on is if you're pursuing financial independence, no matter when you're starting or what income you have, again, within reason, are you going to get benefit? And I think the very clear answer is yes, you are going to get immense benefits. And the example that I've used ad nauseum at this point is if you are living paycheck to paycheck, you have no net worth, the first time you have $5,000 saved up, your life is immeasurably better than when you had $0. It just is. The stress, that day-to-day stress of, is there going to be some quote unquote emergency that to any of the three of us is not an emergency. It's just life, right? Life is lumpy sometimes. There are expenses. But to someone who has $0 and is living paycheck to paycheck, a $200 or $300 expense that's unexpected, but not an emergency, is actually an emergency to them. So having that first little bit of money saved up is going to help. And it's going to help dramatically. But right, if someone who's making $40,000 a year going to get to FI as quickly as someone making 400,000? No, obviously. But I don't think it negates the conceptual framework of pursuing FI. So that all said, Bill, I appreciate again the rationality of it in that, okay, you mentioned the shockingly simple math behind early retirement from Mr. Money Mustache, and the numbers don't lie in essence, right? If you save 50% of your income, you're going to reach FI in somewhere in the 12 to 15 year, probably closer to 15-year time span. So just very simply, if you're finding FI at 50 and you all of a sudden started saving 50% of your income, okay, well, then that's going to look like traditional retirement age. But again, I don't think that negates anything. I don't think that it means that person is too late to it. I think they obviously are in a much better position than they otherwise would have been had they not found FI. And of course, that is what you're saying at the essence. You're not saying, hey, pack up shop, you're not welcome here, you're too late, right? So, Becky, I'd love to hear your thoughts now that I had my little monologue for a couple of minutes. Your thoughts on what I said. And I know you have this fun little disagreement with Bill on this, but at your essence, you're both kind of saying the same thing.
Well, exactly. Exactly. So I say, no, it's not too late. It might be too late to get to the retirement you would like to have, the picture that you would build in your mind, but it's not ever too late to make improvements. As Bill said, we can make our lives better and less stressful. And, I wanted to make a comment. I think this was yesterday. I was looking through our Facebook group and I saw someone make a comment, and I hope I'm not going to use any names, so I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but there was a person who made a comment on our Facebook group yesterday that was about the non-financial part of being more comfortable with their finances. They literally said they were sleeping better at night. They felt less stressed. Their health was improving. All these things. And we all know that stress affects every area of our life. And if you're stressed about your money, that spills over into everything. And sometimes we don't even realize it because it feels normal to us. It's been going on so long, we don't realize how stressed we are about our money. And I mean, that really made me feel so good, warmed my heart to know that, I feel like if I make a difference in one person's life, this is all worth it. But that was a comment that you don't see very often. Usually it's like, hey, I've increased my savings rate, or I got a raise at work, or whatever. But that one really hit me of the other areas of this person's life that have been improved.
Yeah, Becky, I think that lowering stress in all aspects of life is such an important component. And I try to highlight that. I think it's that, does this help me pass the sleep well at night test, is what I call it. And I can tell you, I sleep a whole lot better now than I ever have, even when kind of crazy things happen sometimes. Just recently, a company that I was investing in filed for Chapter 11, and there's a reasonable chance I might lose some money. And this was a company called Peer Street. And I didn't have a ton of money in there, or certainly a significant percentage of my net worth, obviously. But nevertheless, that's an amount of money that I may lose some of, that if this were 10 or 15 years ago, I would have had sleepless nights about it. And I haven't lost 1 second of sleep. So I think that's kind of an extreme example of, okay, I'm at this point where that amount of money just, it doesn't mean to me what it used to mean because I understand everything is just going so wonderfully. And I think that starts from that very first $1,000 saved up, that very first couple $1,000 where your stress is just lower. It just is. So, one thing that I kind of alluded to before that I really want to overtly touch on here is maybe some pluses and minuses of getting started late. Because I think our brains immediately go to some obvious minuses, which are, hey, I always hear compounding is about time. And man, if you can get your kids into this at 13 and start saving money, they're on easy street. And oh, I'm 45 or I'm 50. How could I ever catch up? And I think that's, obviously catching up too far. So clearly that the most obvious negative comes to mind. But then that positive that I mentioned before is, hey, maybe you're at your highest earning years and you have the biggest shovel you've ever had to throw at this problem. But you two have both thought about this a lot more deeply than I have. I'm curious, are there pluses and minuses to getting started late, if you will, that other people might not overtly think about, but maybe they're somewhere on the subconscious level?
Well, one thing I can think of a trip. There was a time where I had a dream to raft the Grand Canyon, and as a family trip before my kids left for college. And I didn't think about opportunity cost at all. I didn't think about cost of the trip. It was just a goal, and we did it. It was the time where we were cut off from the world. We spent quality family time together, and it was a memory dividend that can't be paid for. I think you had this experience recently with Taylor Swift too.
Yeah, indeed, Bill. And yeah, those memory dividends. I mean, in that case, for me, that was an uncomfortable amount of money that I spent on tickets. But that's something that memory dividend will truly last a lifetime. And I think, frankly, because I've saved and gotten to this point and also done the work mentally over so many years, I've gotten to the point where I understand it's not that scarcity mindset all the time. So there's constantly this balance of the nuts and bolts of the money and the psychology. And I think it's an interesting kind of give and take as you grow and learn, no matter where you are, who you are, when you're getting started.
I think one of the negatives that people can move to is not only do I not have the time in front of me for compounding to work, but because of my lack of time, I don't have time for mistakes. And that is certainly true. Now, no one is going to find this path and then walk it perfectly. Everybody's going to make mistakes. So the thing that late starters need to be aware of is let's try to eliminate the big mistakes because we don't have time to recover. And then on the positive side, along with a big shovel, which most people may have, and I don't think people think about this at all, we have experience. I tell people I've been around the sun probably more times than you have. We just simply have life experiences. We've faced hard things and we know we can get over it. We can get around it. We can get through it. We can come out the other side and that life does go on. So we have experience in our tool belt to know maybe how to not make those big mistakes. That yes, after we've gotten some education, we can make some wise choices. And then we just have the emotional fortitude to get through stuff because we've faced some stuff already.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, it's, this again, we've talked about this for the last 5 or 10 minutes. I think all of us would agree it's never too late to start pursuing FI. And sometimes things you perceive as negative might be a positive in disguise. And like you both just said, I think there are some significant positives to maybe getting started late. And I think, sure, if we could all do it again, we'd all be perfectly optimized from the time we were 17. Yeah, sure. Right. But that's just not the way the world works. And I think a lot of us get caught up in beating ourselves up for past mistakes. I know I can think of dozens of times where the negative thought goes through my head. Oh, you're so stupid. I can't believe you did X, Y, or Z when it comes to money. And like, I've mostly gotten things right, but yet my brain still goes there. And I can imagine certainly many people who wake up at 50 and have no savings. And what did I just do with the last 25, 28 years after college? And they feel bad. But I think it's really important to pick yourself up and just say, there's nothing that can be done about beating myself up. It doesn't help. It only makes matters worse. And I have to take action today and every tomorrow thereafter. And I think that's the empowerment that all three of us are trying to get across. And just to kind of close out the episode. So obviously ChooseFI has been around for a long time. We've done 600 plus episodes. And I think, like I said at the outset of the episode, I think your podcast, Catching Up to Fi, is one of the most exciting things to come along in a very long time. And I know I've been one of the early champions. I love your show. I told you this when you were getting started. We jumped on a Zoom call, I think right at the very, very beginning of the podcast when maybe an episode was out. And I just thought it had a ton of potential. And I'm just so happy for you both and just really proud of what you've done, what you've built. And I know you have a thriving Facebook community, and it just seems like people are craving this. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts. I know a lot of it comes back to, hey, stories make the world go round. And when people can see themselves in stories, they realize, oh, that person did it. I can too. I think that's one of my biggest takeaways from hundreds of episodes of ChooseFI. But I'm curious if you guys have had any reflections on why the podcast has taken off so much, why the community has grown so quickly.
I'll take that one because as an emergency physician, I impact people's lives. But in my career, I have not experienced the gratitude in 26 odd years of medicine that I've experienced in the last 5 months of Catching Up to Fi. It's incredible. It is a niche that I think is underserved. It just hasn't been around. It's there in the world, but it just hasn't been specifically addressed. And you can feel the need. Our Facebook community is incredibly engaged. We encourage people to introduce themselves, tell their stories, share a picture with us. And then every week we have, just like you, what are your actionable goals this week? And people engage in that. They say, I've done this. It can be as small as I cut Netflix. It can be as big as I transitioned out of a financial advisor. It's absolutely incredible to me how impactful it has been on people's lives. It's humbling. It's truly humbling.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much encouragement there. Before when we were talking about mistakes, I was just thinking to myself, most people who know me know that I'm a person of faith. And I have a saying that God never wastes a hurt. So we walked through a lot of pain. And one of my goals for putting my story out there on the podcast and on the blog I started a few years ago is trying to help other people not walk through that same pain. But, all of our stories, like you said, stories make the world go round. There are so many folks on our Facebook group that are willing to share their mistakes and their wins because they know it's going to be encouraging to somebody else. And we all just help pick each other up and carry each other along with our stories. So I just love that.
Yeah, the positivity, the encouragement. I think a lot of people feel there's just a drumbeat of negativity when they go online, then they read the news. But to find communities like both of ours, where it's oriented around action, it's oriented around positivity and making your life better, that feels pretty darn good. And to find other people who are doing something that might be a little bit countercultural, which I think is still ridiculous that what we're doing is countercultural, but nevertheless, like the community comes together. And yeah, it's been a really wonderful thing to say. And I'm just really very, very happy for you. And thank you for the service you're doing for our community. It's a marvelous thing. And I guess closing out here. So obviously people are listening to this podcast. You're on a podcast player, search for Catching Up to Fi. And that's the easiest way to find you both. And we'll have a link for your Facebook group in the show notes. Or if they're listening to your podcast, then I'm sure they can find the direct way to get in. But is there any other way to get in touch, or are those really the best two ways?
We have a website, catchinguptofi.com. There's resources there, and hopefully it'll grow. We have a blog there that we're encouraging, because we can't have everybody's story on the show, but we're encouraging guests to just tell their story and share them online. We have a way to reach us through SpeakPipe where they can ask questions, make comments. There's resources for books, podcasts, blogs to try and help people find the resource that resonates with them.
Beautiful. I love it. Becky and Bill, thank you for coming on the show. And this certainly will not be the last time. I would love to have you both back on. We can share some of those stories, right? Because again, stories make the world go round. And yeah, this is just a marvelous thing. So thank you both.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks for having us.